Samir spent most of his night desperately trying to figure out how to escape from their predicament and extricate his wife from the desperate situation they were now embroiled in. There were with him other 2 detainees inside the hut, Sudanese, but none of them were in any position to talk. One was dead drunk. There is common Sudanese local liquor known as Iraqi, made clandestinely by Sudanese women inside their huts and sold to the locals. It is stronger than the Indian Darrow. Anyone ingesting it will be in a deep stupor. Indeed, you can skin his flesh or behead him, without any pain response resulting. The other detainee was badly battered by the locals before his limp body was carried by the cops and dumped in the lockup. He, too, was motionless. It would seem that a deadly fight had resulted in both his legs, hands, teeth broken, and ghastly lacerations to boot. He also had fractured skull, his both eyes were swollen shut. He could not open his mouth too. His open wounds were bleeding and he was dying. Samir wondered as how the local policeman could be so heartless as to detain him without access to emergency medical treatment. Being a foreigner, Samir did not comprehend the extent of the disgusting and ugly racism that had been introduced to Sudan since Islam permeated it. Islam, by virtue of its class distinctions, had created new breed of species of human beings known as black Arabs. If a black man claims that he is a white man or vice versa, you will think that that person is either mentally challenged or sick person. The Arab invasion of Sudan resulted in the country being renamed Arid al-Sud or Al-Sudan, which means the land of the black people. A new breed of people came to existence and claimed Arabic descent. They are black. From head to toe, they are Africans. Calling any of them Africans will result in death treats for the insult. You would be likening him to a Zanji, or Negro. The phrase black Arab is an oxymoron statement. These 2 words Arab and black cannot exist in the same sentence. The Arab is reddish and Semite. Jews and Arabs are the descendants of Sam, the son of Noah, and that is why they are called Semitic people. The African man is black and Hamitic, descendant of Ham, the son of Noah. White people and Indians, of India, are Japhetic people, the descendants of Japheth, the son of Noah. Having said this, those black Sudanese Arabs considered themselves to be masters and the original African Sudanese, their slaves. As we mentioned, this evil form of racism started when Sudan ceased being a Christian country. The conquering Muslim Arabs, as is their custom, treat defeated African Christians as their sabaya, or female war captives. As captive women they are subject to being raped without. Children born out of these forced unions are called the Awlad al-Jawari, children of black female slaves. Those children would later claim to be pure Arabs and follow in the footsteps of the very people who sired them. Despite the vernacular black complexion and the Afro-African hair, they would still claim to be pure Arabs and direct descendants of the Prophet Muhammad. Understandably, such divisions resulted in a long-lasting civil war in south of Sudan, which recently led to the division of the nation of Sudan into the south of Sudan and the north of Sudan. It also led to the uprising of the African Sudanese tribes of Darfur province. In order to stamp out the Fur rebels, the Islamic government of Khartoum resorted to hideously efficient crimes, condemned by the International Criminal Court and led to the eventual indictment of the President of Sudan, Omar al-Bashir, and his gangs with war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. When the British left Sudan in 1956, they handed over the leadership of the country to the black Arabs. Until today, all the major positions in government are theirs. The African Sudanese are not allowed to work even as police officers or military officers. They work as cleaners, street sweepers, sewer workers, men servants, maid servants, local liquor makers, thieves, burglars, robbers, prostitutes, etc. I know that the last 5 are not jobs, but circumstances force some of them either to steal and rob or face the prospect of starvation. Having said this, let us go back to Samir and his black African Sudanese cell mates. There appeared to be no avenue of escape, the hut having only small guarded door. The door was securely locked with a big padlock and guarded by 2 armed guards. Samir reasonably surmised that his wife was shut up in yet another similar hut with the 2 Eritrean girls. He was worried that those cops might take advantage of the situation and abuse their authority by raping them. He hoped that such an evil fate would not befall them, offering a silent prayer for their collective safety. He remembered that all the policemen he saw had long beards, indicating their piousness, which gave him a glimmer of hope. He thought that religious Muslim men would fear their Allah and therefore would not think of raping defenseless young women like his wife and the 2 Eritrean girls. Samir had no tools to pry a hole through the wood and grass wall of the hut. His hands were useless against the fairly sturdy construction of the adobe. At dawn, the rain began to fall, accompanied by heavy thundering and lightning. The thought that the hut might be hit by a thunderbolt and burned down crossed Samir's mind. He heard sad stories of Sudanese dying during thunderstorms. Deep in musing, an idea appeared to him and he decided to give it a try. He decided to search the 2 half-dead suspects for any tools that might be on their person when they were dragged in. Using the occasional flash of lightning for illumination, he began with the dead drunk. He found on him a snuff box, 2 amulets, and a few Sudanese coins. He put them back and went to the one who looked mortally wounded. He found on him a long dagger fastened with a leather strip around his left shoulder and underarm. Samir carefully unarmed the man and took his local weapon. He searched the rest of his body for more useful tools, but found instead a few amulets fastened around his waist. It looked like while protective talismans were very popular in Sudan, they scarcely worked. Samir guessed rightly because the people of Sudan were very superstitious and 90% of the men believed in the protective power of amulets. They believed that a person wearing the right amulet would effectively be protected against all weapons including firearms. They also believed that neither snake nor scorpion could emit a poison to kill an amulet-guarded man. Women were not allowed to wear amulets because they were considered religiously unclean. Ironically, the same religious fakirs or gurus who make those amulets and sell them can be hired to harm and kill with black magic. Samir used the dagger as a saw and began to cut through the wood, making a hole in the wall. In an hour, the hole looked large enough to enable him to escape. Trying the hole, he realized that it was still too small, but it was almost light out, so he forced his way through. His skin had abrasion from the wood and his clothes were torn and soiled with blood. As soon as he stepped out, it sank in the mud that had been created by the continuously pouring rain. Samir began to walk carefully in the mud, mindful to make as little noise as possible. It was still dark. He began to walk and find his way with the occasional flash of lightning. His next task was more difficult. There were 3 huts in front of him. He had no clue which hut was used as lock-up for the women. If he started to dig a hole in each one, then the morning would come before he could finish with the second one. He could not afford to breach the wrong hut. The 3 huts were similar, with one exception. One of the huts had a rear window facing the back of the prison compound. Samir ruled out that hut because the dungeon from where he just escaped was windowless. It had to be a storeroom or an office. Now Samir was left with 2 huts. Both huts had no windows. After carefully surveying them over 3 consecutive lightning strikes, Samir was stumped. He could find no clues to deduce a solution. His Western mentality was not helping him, so he decided to fall back on his 8-month tenure with these 7th-century people to figure out which hut housed his wife. Daybreak was less than an hour away before he would lose the element of surprise and his head start. Experience told him that women in Sudan were always isolated as if they carried contagious diseases or were dangerous beasts. In that sense, it was obvious that the hut furthest away from the others and the epicenter would be the obvious choice. Samir knew that, if he guessed incorrectly, the consequences were dire. His choices were either to run away to save himself but his beloved to her inevitable death in the hands of those ruthless people, or go back to his hut and face the consequences of trying to escape. With those frightening thoughts in mind, Samir offered a quick prayer before he began to create a hole in that isolated hut. He worked very hard and quickly until he made a small hole, which enabled him to view the creatures inside the hut. Through the lightning he spotted the 3 females lying fast asleep on the ground. He resumed his task until in short time he made a bigger hole than the one he created for his own escape. He did not want his beloved to experience the same pain and have the same cuts and bruises on her delicate body as he went through during his escape. Then, he crept inside the hut like a thief in the night. Through the lightning, Samir saw 3 bodies lying on the ground, and each one was covered from head to feet with black blanket. It would seem that the cops rendered more care on the female detainees. He faced with yet another dilemma. It seemed unwise to touch any of the girls randomly, which may result in the girl screaming in fright. If such thing happened, he knew the 2 armed guards would rush in and shoot him. So he had to know exactly which sleeping form belonged to Samira. The 3 bodies became like the 3 identical huts. Once again, he needed to use his intuition and make a correct choice. This problem would not be solved through gender discrimination or any outside assistance. He just used his intelligence to identify the body of his beloved. He knew that the 2 Eritrean girls were shorter than Samir and had less fleshy. It took him less than a second to recognize the body of his beloved after applying that logic. Samir bent over the body of his beloved and put his both hands on her mouth and closed it. When Samira woke up, she made some suppressed sound and struggled to free her mouth. Her struggles dislodged the blanket from her eyes and she quickly recognized her lover. In whispers, Samir instructed her to be quiet and follow him without making any sound. Samira followed her husband to the hole. Then, he assisted her to emerge out of the hut and immediately he came behind her. Samir wanted to return to the hut and wake up the 2 Eritrean girls and assist them to escape with them. Samira caught hold of his hand and stopped him from going back. She told him that the 2 girls had already paid the price of their freedom and they would be on their way to their refugees camp as soon as the day broke. Samir could not understand what his beloved meant and asked her to explain herself better. Samira said to Samir, "It is a long story but this is not the right time to tell it." She promised to make everything clear after their escape. When the police officer, Babakir Hussein Osama, returned from his house on the following morning and learned that the 2 foreigners had escaped at night, he slapped the constable who broke the news. He cursed the other policemen and called them every filthy word known to him. He threatened to send them to prison for the rest of their lives. It took him forever to compose himself and to come to terms with the reality of the situation. Officer Babakir Hussein's anger multiplied when he remembered that he had not yet carried out his vengeful retaliation on his 2 bitter enemies, the Indian woman and her American boyfriend. He was so exhausted and lost all his strength the previous day due to the many happenings of the day. He decided to retire to his house and have good rest, then appease his rage on those 2 foreigners the following day. He was determined to beat and brutally rape the Indian first and then cruelly hammer and skin the flesh off the American. Not surprisingly, he issued strict instructions that no one was to touch the foreigners until his return. The effect of his decision was to spare Samira a beating and a rape. It also spared Samir from the torture of having his flesh being skinned from his body. The police officer, Babakir, phoned many places and reported the escape of an American man and an Indian woman who were arrested by him for very serious crimes against Islam and Sudan. He claimed that the government of Sudan would pay a big reward for information resulting or leading to the recapture of the fugitives. After that, he took 5 policemen with him and went to Sakina's house and searched it in and out for any clues to indicate that those 2 criminals had returned back. After frantically ransacking the deserted house and finding nothing of help, the angry police officer and his team returned to their head office. 24 hours passed and no information was supplied regarding the whereabouts of those two escapees. The police officer, Babakir Osama, sent letters and personal messengers to all the nearby villages, towns, and cities. He employed all the police force under his control in searching An Nayed town, where the American couple were believed to be in hiding, with the help of locals, bribed of course. His team conducted house-to-house searches and scoured the entire local market. Babakir believed that the foreign couple must have escaped with outside help of sort. He advised his team of the possibility, adding that the two fugitives lived together, had sex day and night without being married to each other. He said further that, among their traveling documents, he did not find anything to indicate that they were husband and wife. He swore by his Allah that white people don't believe in marriage any longer and live together like animals. They stopped believing in their Christianity and became atheists and followers of the nihilism of Nietzsche and the existentialism of Jean-Paul Sartre. They rejected God and embraced the so-called Enlightenment, which resulted in two deadly world wars that claimed the lives of 75 million people and produced the greatest tyrants of human history, Hitler, Mussolini, and Stalin. Officer Babakir Hussain Osama gained a little knowledge while studying in India, which resulted in his subordinates considering him the most educated police officer in the world. Since he was held their passports and tickets, Babakir believed that the accursed American and Indian could not make it out of the country, and sooner or later he would arrest them again. He had already confiscated all their belongings and the foreign and local money he found on them the day of their arrest. The days continued to pass without a trace of them. The two policemen were planning to release the two Eritrean girls after having sex with them for 5 days. It was well-traveled road for all policemen in Sudan. Babakir came to know about the secret deal and emphatically refused to release the girls. He accused them of arranging the escape of the American couple. He began to torture them with the hope of extracting some information to assist his search. He repeatedly raped them both. He went further than that and began to accuse them of convincing his policemen to allow those two infidels to escape. He also accused the two cops who had sex deal with the two Eritrean girls. The two policemen denied the serious accusation and pleaded innocence. When he could not find the so-called two spies, Officer Babakir Hussain Osama announced that the government of Sudan had increased the rewards for the person or persons who would supply information about their hiding place. The new rewards included free tickets to Saudi Arabia and full coverage for performing the Hajj rituals. If the informant had already performed the Islamic pilgrimage and not interested doing it again, then the government of Khartoum would give him or her and the members of their household lottery visas for resettlement in America or Canada. Even if the informant had not been to the House of Allah at Mecca and would like to go directly to the Promised Land Canada instead of the Holy Land, he or she is free to do so. Everyone in the town and its outskirts decided if he or she happened to be the lucky informer to choose to immigrate forever to the western land that flows with honey and money instead of going to the Muslims' holy land in Saudi Arabia and then return again to the hell of Sudan. When the citizens of An Nayed town and its suburbs heard about the tempting rewards, many innocent people were accused of hiding the two spies and hence dragged in and tortured by the cruel police. Even so, the police officer Babakir Hussain Osama couldn't find the two foreign escapees or any information to lead to their whereabouts. Meanwhile, Samir and Samira had no escape plan. They just ran. Samir was aware from the beginning that their escape was going to expose his young wife to all kinds of sexual harassment in that hellish of a country. He knew that every Muslim male in that country had perverted views of women. He also knew that if he had allowed their transfer to Khartoum, his wife's identity would be known. He remembered the case of the British female teacher who allowed her student to name his teddy bear Muhammad. This was considered the highest insult to the beautiful name of the alleged prophet of Allah. The whole city of Khartoum went in the streets and demanded the execution of the blasphemous British female teacher. What then would Sudanese Muslims do when confronted with a woman who equated their prophet to her foot and threatened to spit on their holy Quran? Samir knew that no Western authority would be able to save her. So he chose the lesser evil. Even if some evil men would find them on their escape and kill him and then rape and kill his wife, that would be lesser evil for him than to live the rest of his life with the guilt of allowing her to go alone to the gallows. He regretted that he stopped her from writing her life story and publishing it as a book. Instead, he convinced her to come with him to those darkened, blinded, and condemned people who were following the prince of the power of the air, the power of darkness, the ruler of this world, and the god of this age. As they anticipated, their escape was met with dangers and troubles wherever they went. After Samir helped his beloved to escape from her lock-up hut, the two of them just ran away without any guidance and plan. They had no money or any map to guide their way. The only things they had were the clothes on their bodies, the shoes in their feet, and one dagger concealed inside Samir's dress. Somehow, they managed to exit out of the En-Nayed town on foot. Avoiding main roads, they walked through the bush, accompanied by the pouring rain, which also slowed down vehicular and pedestrian traffic. In Sudan, heavy rain, like heavy snow in the west, results in cars being completely mired in mud, with escape only possible with the mud drying out. Without aim or specific destination, the American couple continued to walk inside the bush. Their progress was slow due to water accumulating everywhere. After walking for 5 hours, they felt they were far enough from their captors and stopped to rest. Food and water became their next concern. The groundwater was muddy and dirty. Necessity forced them to bow down on their knees and drink it. Then, they began to search the bush for some edible fruits or leaves, but found none. They were worried that grass would cause more harm than good. After long search, Samir spotted some fruits which looked like dates. He knew the fruits were not dates because dates grew on palms. This tree was a short tree. He did recall seeing them sold in the local market of En-Nayed, and so concluded that they were edible. Samir ate one, cautioning his wife to wait until she was sure they were benign. After 10 minutes, he gave his wife the green light to eat too. The dry fruits did not fully satisfy their hunger, but gave them some strength to resume their uncertain and hazardous journey toward the unknown. It took the American couple another 5 hours on foot before reaching another small town. Samir suggested caution and entering only after sunset. So, they waited for a couple of hours for the sun to sink below the horizon to enable them to walk through without being identified as foreigners. The town hardly had any lights in it. Its streets were not lit except for the local lamps the locals carried in their hands while walking. On their arrival, the American couple met an old man walking with his little son. The two looked like travelers who just entered the town. They tried to communicate with them through bodily language, but they couldn't. The old man took the hand of Samir and began to walk him with them. The couple decided to trust the old man and follow him. They thought the old man might take them to his relatives and allow them to spend the night in their house. At the same time, they did not rule out the possibility that he might take them to the police. Having no other alternatives, the couple followed the old man and his son to a big fenced compound with newly built huts. The huts looked different from all the huts they had seen. They were large and square. All the huts they had seen so far were small and round. The couple thought the old man had fooled them and brought them to a police station. They were so surprised when they spotted a black young woman dressed up like a nun. She was tall and walked gracefully. A big cross hung loosely from her neck and fell below her chest. Clutching a big local lamp in her left hand, she opened the gate of the compound and welcomed them. They walked in and followed her in silence into a big hut. Entering the hut, another surprise, or rather a miracle, greeted them. They found a white woman in nun's robes, adorned with a similar crucifix. She stood up and greeted them in English. Then, she requested them to take their seats in front of her big table. The other black nun went out but came back quickly with a tray of juice. The white nun waited for her guests to finish their drinks. Then, she talked to the old man in the local language for some time. When she finished talking to him, she turned to the couple and began to question them. The couple decided not to trust the white nun entirely at this point. They were afraid that she might turn out to be the kind of religious fanatic who refuses to lie, even to save the lives of refugees. They introduced themselves to her as American Muslims who came to visit the Muslim world. They said to her before they came to Sudan, they had visited the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Dubai, and Lebanon. After revealing their names, Samir told her that they ran in troubles with some locals who accused them of being spies to the West and then beaten them, robbed their money and traveling documents, and left them half dead in the bush. The white nun was a very shrewd woman, and did not seem to believe the entire story. She sensed a snake in the bush. To their abject surprise, she bluntly demanded to know if they were truly Muslims or was it just their cover. Samir and Samira were shocked and perplexed and at loss of what to say or do. Since the day they came to the Muslim world, close to 1 year ago, no one had ever doubted their pseudo-conversion to Islam until fate brought them before the white nun. They felt as if that white woman had received a divine guidance that enabled her to see what was hidden in their hearts. Before answering her penetrating question which went deep in their inner beings, Samir looked at his wife. Samira's face remained calm, which gave him the green light to go ahead. He decided to tell it all, from A to Z. He began from the time they visited a mosque in America and pretended to be Muslim converts until they managed to escape from their detention at the En-Nayed town at the early hours of that day. The white nun did neither condemn their story nor approve it. She just told them to spend the night in her charity home and promised to talk to them the following day. The charity home was a combination of 3 charitable units, a Catholic church, a local school, and a small medical clinic. That evening, the couple were given a hut with 2 single beds in it. They were served a delicious local meal cooked out of meat, bread, milk, and water. After having their meals, Samir asked Samira to go with him on her knees and close her eyes. Then, the two of them confessed their sins before God and asked him to forgive them for their lies which put them in such a mess. Samir asked his wife to pardon him for exposing her to such kind of danger. Though she accepted his pardon, still Samira told her husband that she did not see him responsible in any way of jeopardizing her life and his life. Samir promised the Lord and his wife that if they managed to escape safely and return to their country he would never ever again use lies to expose evils. The following day, the white nun reproached the American couple for their lies, which exposed them to such an imminent danger. She also rebuked them sharply for denying the Lord by pretending to be Muslims. Samir and Samira agreed, seeing her logic. They confessed their sins to the Lord and asked him to pardon them for acting foolishly by denying him, pretending to be the followers of Satan. Then, she told them that, if the policemen come after them, the first place they were going to look for them would be her church. So she advised them for their safety and her church's safety that they should leave as soon as possible. She told them that as the children of God who admitted and confessed their sins and asked forgiveness from the Lord, she promised to assist them with some little cash and some food to take with them on their journey. She explained safest route to them, and that it would lead them to the border of South Sudan. Further assistance would be forthcoming there. The nearest place from her town would be the disputed city of Abiy. She warned them from using the main roads or local transportation such as lorries, trucks, buses, and animals. She advised them trek the route on foot, estimating a week's time for them to complete their journey. Then, she added that the best time to begin their journey south out of her compound and her town would be after sunset. Meanwhile, she promised to arrange some clothes for them. She mentioned that, because she saw how their clothes were torn and smeared with mud and blood. Lastly, she said to them, if they got caught they should not mention that they had come to her charity home and she had given them a shelter for a day. The American couple thanked the white nun and made a solemn promise that no matter what might happen to them they would never put her or her sanctuary in any danger. Shortly, after the white nun provided clothes, some dry food, water in an animal skin, and some cash for the couple's 1-week journey, Christina's body developed a serious fever and she became feverish. She began to feel dizzy and her health deteriorated by the minute. When Michael informed the white nun about his wife's condition, she immediately guessed her illness. She told him the symptoms pointed to malaria. She promised to call one of the town's doctors, explaining that he was a Christian from the Noba Mountains. She assured them he was known and trustworthy. When the doctor arrived, he confirmed the diagnosis and prescribed 5 injections, one daily for 5 days, in the buttocks. The couple tried to explain their situation and asked the doctor to treat Christina in shorter time. The doctor apologized and said to them, the only available treatment he knew for the African malaria was those 5 injections. The white nun understood the situation and asked the couple to stay longer in her charity home. Accordingly, the couple's trip was postponed indefinitely, pending Christina's recovery. The long and arduous journey out of the Islamic Republic of the Sudan to the Democratic Republic of South of Sudan just had to wait.